All right, Jessica. I'm glad that I'm able to share my story with you today. According to UNICEF, um, every 2 seconds, a child is actually born into a war or into a battle. And for some of us, we may look at battle as, it differs from house to house. I mean, some people are actually were born into a war zone. For some, it's just a home that they're born into where abuse and all those sorts of situation arises. But I was born into a war called a civil war in a country called Sri Lanka. It was probably like the bloodiest civil war of the 20th century, which lasted up to the 21st century. And even though I was a young child who was born into that war, even though I had an opportunity to leave that country, I'm very young. I was 2 years old when I had an opportunity to leave that country in the early 80s. We moved to a country called Germany in Europe. Where I spent most of my childhood, was raised in Germany, spoke the language. But the post-traumatic effect of being born into a war really carried along with me when I just moved in. But not only that, by the time I turned 10 months, my dad also passed away. And my mom was a single mother. My grandpa, who was a farmer, sold some of his land, gave us the money, and told us to go to Europe. So think about it. Here I am with a single mother who didn't speak the language, who was a foreigner, a colored person, moving to a foreign country with two kids, a young kids, and so growing up without a father really had a significant impact on my life. I still remember the first time a child came and asked me, "Where is your father?" And I remember pausing. I was around 5 years old. I paused for a second and I was thinking, where is he really? And I just told him that he's with God, and that's what I told him. And yet that puzzled me, where he was and why he died. My mom never told us anything about why he died, how he died. It just in the later time we found out he died of cancer. But my mom never interacted with us because she didn't want us to feel the ache of not having us. So she tried to fill in that place. But I was sort of yearning for that affirmation. I would go to soccer training, and I would see, their parents, dads, with their children, encouraging, telling him, coaching him. And I would sit at the corner and just yearn for that affirmation of a father. I had uncles who came in, kind of played certain roles and try to fill in that gap. They would leave. They were also abusive a little. They were trying to try to discipline us very harshly. And my mom was never around because she was a single mother. And so she would go to work and she would do 2-3 jobs just to make the ends meet. And not to blame her, because she just wanted us to have a better life. But just her being absent and, my dad not being there, I learned very young to look after myself. A spirit of independence, I would say, started to form. So I remember 6 years, 7 years cooking meals, dinners, lunch, and walking ourselves to school. And it's really unheard in today's context. But those things started to rise. But yet, I was raised in a society where people like foreigners were not treated well, and there was a little bit of racism. So and then that also caused me to feel confused. Why did I look so different from others? So by the time I was 12, we decided to move to North America, to Canada. And so here I am, 12-year-old, into another foreign country, now having to learn another language, which was English. And so my first day in school, in Canada, I was literally chased by two individuals who said that I couldn't speak English, and they chased me. And I came on a time where it was winter. So they chased me, took snowballs, and they started throwing at
Oh
me.
no.
And yeah, it was very embarrassing. And so here I am now back in Canada, having to learn a new language, having to form this new identity, having to, make new friends. I became afraid. And especially that event in my elementary school shook me a little bit, and I became a little bit afraid. So when I confronted some of the students, and also brought it to the attention to my teachers, they never took it to heart. And I still remember that day I said, you know what, I have to take things into my own hand. I have to learn to defend myself. And so this began to form another identity, because at the core, what I was looking for is, who is this person that I am? I never felt I belonged anywhere. I didn't feel I belonged in my own country, which they had a civil war. I had to leave that country of my birth, and I went to Germany, where I felt I was at least forming my identity there, at least becoming, even though I look different. Then here I am in Canada, another language, and I just couldn't understand who this person is. And so when I got to high school, things started to change. A lot of the teenagers, because when I got to high school, for the first time, I started seeing a lot of my colored people in high school, because high school is like everybody comes together into this one
Sure,
school.
yeah.
So I started seeing a lot of people who looked like me, who were from a different background. They were colored people, so we were a bigger crowd. And so through that, I felt I belonged somewhere, and identity was formed. But with the group that I was able to form, there were kids who were just having, troubles. They were just like me, either being raised without a father. Some of the kids who are now living with their uncles, where their parents are still in back home. Some who don't even have any father, living with foster kids. So when I was with them, I felt like, okay, I could actually relate to them. I could share my story, and they could share their stories, and I felt we bonded. But kids who are raised without their fathers, you do the studies, they're prone to get into trouble. They don't go to school properly. They end up dropping out, and that was really my story. You end up getting into drugs. That was my reality. I started getting into drugs. I started getting into alcohol. And then, as we are part of a group now, and that forms a gang, then there was turf war. We would cross schools, and we would get into fights. And that was really what I was getting involved in. And in the midst of all this, when you go back, I just felt like I just wanted to belong somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that, whatever I do in life, there was no one to appreciate. I still remember I got in my grade 10 in math class, I got 100% in my math test. And I remember my teachers were stunned. The students were stunned, and I was looking at it, and I'm like, you know what? It doesn't matter. Nobody's there to celebrate this with me. Not because I was not academically wired. It's just that I felt that no one was there to appreciate what I was doing as a success. And in the midst of all this, I had uncles who always, spoke ill of me. I still remember one of my uncle taking a math book and throwing it at me and saying, "You will not amount to nothing." And I still remember that when he threw that, I'm like, you know what? He's probably right. I will not amount to nothing. And so that, in return, I became rageful. I wanted to show that anger towards something else. So the only place I could show that anger is to a gang, to a group of people who would show that anger towards others. And so while we were doing that, we were just getting more hurtful, more angry, more bitter towards the world. We felt it was us against the world. And we're teenagers, and so there was no one there to really influence us. So the only influence we got is either through music, or it is to people like us, like me, who actually had the similar story, and they also felt rage and anger. And so this ended up going into more of a turf battle, where we started carrying guns and started carrying knives. In 1998, it came on the Sunday Sun newspaper. A group of us, we crossed schools. We went to a school in Newmarket. And while we were there, one of my friends took a gun. We went there to confront two students there. While this confrontation was happening, my friend took a gun, and he opened fire on a public parking spot, and the police was called. He wasn't shooting at someone, he was just shooting it on the air to scare them.
Right.
Everybody was running, we were running, and the police was called, and we were all got arrested. And on that day, 1998, the judge looked at me and he said, "You are a menace to society." And he said, "We are not going to give you bail." And even though that label stuck with me quite a long time, and I was put into prison. While in prison, I felt for the first time, that was my first time I was actually got to witness what prison looks like. Here I am, 18-year-old, living with 28-year-old people who have lived in prison over 30 to 25 years, who have committed murder, committed, atrocity, and here I am with them. And for the first time, I felt like, oh my God, my life is going to end in this situation, in a prison cell. And I still remember calling my mom and asking my mom to get me out in bail. My mom said, "John, you need to turn your life around. I encourage you to read a Bible." And I became angry at her, and I'm like, why would you talk to me about God and Bible? Where was he when I was abused, when I was going through all these things? So I became really angry with her. But yet she was just insisting to me, I want you to get hold of a Bible and find peace with God. And so I said, you know what, there's no way someone is ever going to give you a Bible in a prison cell. But I said, if someone would do, Mom, I would go ahead and do it. And on that following week, someone was handing out Bibles. It was a Gideon ministry. It's like a Gideon Bible. And they were handing out to a chaplaincy service. And I remember walking towards that person and to the chaplain asking for a Bible. And I took that Bible and I started reading it. And I mean, Jessica, I just don't know how to explain it. It just spoke so much life. I just needed to hear some of the words that were spoken. And I got to this place called the prodigal son, who has gone away from his father and goes out and spends all his money that he got as an inheritance from his father, and goes out and spends all his money. And now he's like wasted everything. He has partied too hard. Now he's at that lowest of lowest position where he's at. And he finally says, you know what, I will get back and I will go back to my father and see if he will accept me, not as a son, but at least as a servant. And the story goes, and I'm reading this, Jessica, and I'm like, my heart is pounding, because I know what kind of, I mean, I don't know if you're Asian or not, but I come from an Asian country. You lose stuff like that, you come back to your father is going to spank you. He's going to say, don't come into my house. You're not worth it. He's going to shut the door on you. And that's the reflection I'm thinking on, that this father, this prodigal is going to go back to. He's going to shut the door. He's going to say, you are an embarrassment to our family. You're a shame to our family. Get out. And to my surprise, as I'm reading, the story goes on to say that the father runs to the son, embraces him and hugs him and invites him into his hand and says, you know what, my son who was lost, now he's found. And there's a big celebration happening. And I couldn't understand it. I was confused. I'm like, what is in the earth is happening here? And so Jesus tells that this is the heart of God. And for the first time, I'm like, God, would you accept me with all these baggage, with all these things that I've committed? Would you actually forgive me? And from that day on, I just felt that there was something in me changed, and just something awakened in my heart. To make the story short, I should have been there for a long time. One of the person who was also arrested, who was the one who fired the gun, confessed that it was him, and I was released after 3 months being in prison. I came out. My life didn't change automatically. I still struggle with the same old struggles and the same old baggage that I had in the past. But something inside of me changed, Jessica. I had an appreciation for life again. So this is where a lot of people get stuck, because they know something happened to them inside, because there's something spiritually took place. But physically, outwardly, we're still in that same environment. So we're forced to change, but the environment keeps telling us, no, all these labels keep telling us you're still that same person. And so I was in that confusion still again, like not really knowing. Now I have found the hope that I found in God, and yet I'm still that same individual. So I couldn't connect those two dots together. So I still struggled with the challenges. I was still going party, but now when I'm partying, I'm feeling yuck about it. When I'm doing the things that I did in the past, even though I'm doing it, I'm feeling I don't feel happy up anymore. And so all these things it's just bubbling up within me. But yet I couldn't know how to change all these situations. Meantime, while I'm going through it. So I just came to a place, I was like, you know what? I cannot do what God asked me to do. Therefore, I'm just going to go back to my old life. So by the time I'm 19, 20, I went back again into the world full force, got into heavier drugs. This is where I got into to crack, cocaine. I got into, sniffing, and my life just, you started seeing it going down and down and down. And at this point, people already have walked away, my friends and family. Now here I am alone and just, getting into these heavier drugs. Just overnight, my life just got robbed. And by the time I was 21, I was held at a gunpoint by these two drug dealers who, accused of me that I owed them money. And they put a shotgun in my face, Jessica. And I was already broken at that time. All those pride, all those toughness that I thought I had when I was a teenager, I was just done. I was such an afraid, fearful individual. So when they put that shotgun on my face, I knew at that point that my life is going to end. But they didn't pull the trigger. But what they did, they took a crowbar and they broke my head. They left me bleeding there. And my life just started sinking and sinking. I remember at 21, standing at my balcony at my mom's apartment and contemplating whether I should jump or not. Several times I felt like I wanted to take my life away. Several times I thought my life is over. But what ended up happening by the time 21, I was walking with a group of people. We got drunk. We were going through this motion of just walking the street, and a cop pulled over. And for some reason, we got into an altercation with the cops, and the cops just arrested me. I don't even know what that charges was, but the charges dropped eventually. But I was arrested. But I was also put back into prison. And here I am, 21, put him back into prison again for 3 days. I was arrested on Friday. I was there on a Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. I was released. So I still remember, Jessica, sitting there as a 21-year-old, and I came to a fork in the road, a turning point, a tipping point, and I realized, okay, this life cannot continue like that. I've wasted so much of my life, and I remember calling my pastor, and I said, Pastor, my life is a mess. I'm here back in prison. What do I do? He said, you know what, John, you just need to ask God's mercy. You just need to ask. And I know it's simple, but I remember when I was in prison, when I was my lowest point, that what connected me back to reality was God himself. And I remember sitting at the bunk bed, Jessica, and I was asking God, and I said, Lord, if you're really there, change my life. When I come out, I want to be a different person. And I felt this peace, Jessica. I cannot describe how that is. It was a supernatural peace, a calmness. I felt a sense of peace at that moment, that everything will be okay. I came back. By the time I got back, some of the group that I hung around, for some reason, some of them got arrested. So, and some have moved away. And here I am in this home by myself, just like this lockdown. And I started seeking God. I started seeking God, and I started reading the Bible. It was this soul searching moment for my life. I said, you know what? If this is real, if I want to make a change, I have to make that first step to wanting to make the change. So I started reading the scriptures. I started reading, started meditating. I started going to fellowship with people. And I still remember while I was walking one day with my Bible, I was taking the bus. a group of people drove by, and they saw me, and some of them were not my friends. One guy got off the car, and he just started to punk me off. He's like, I'm going to start a fight with you. And I remember standing there, and no fear anymore. And he was just, I know he had so much rage. He wanted to hurt me, but he couldn't do anything. And then he just finally just got back into the car and left. And I'm like, that was interesting. And one time I was going to a Bible study again, and a group of so-called friends drove by, and they were just mocking me. They were like, you are a waste of life, and you're gonna pollute the church by going back. No one is gonna accept you. You're a faker, and all that kind of stuff. And I remember feeling like, you know what? That's okay. If I'm gonna be a fool for what I believe, I'm willing to do that. Because I came to a place, I said, you know what, I'm going to cut the tie. If I'm going to make the change, I'm going to go on this route, and I'm going to see what this route is going to take me. If God said that his life, he's going to show me a path that will get brighter and brighter, then I'm going to trust that. So I started pursuing that. And even though I looked foolish to them, there were opportunities that I had, that I could have just, step back and go back into the same lifestyle. But I said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to pursue this path. And just to show you the reality of the error of that person who made mockery, 10 years after, I visited him because he committed suicide. And I visited him in his funeral. And I remember I felt deep inside of me, my life could have been just that if I would have followed their path. The very same guy who mocked me, he committed suicide. And I realized that, and I had given this great opportunity. But the great thing is that it didn't stop. As I was making new changes, new habits were formed, and new habits made me a different person, and then a new identity was formed. And from there on, God just took a different direction. I went back to school. I got hired at a major bank, with the Royal Bank. I was actually working at a night shift on a Friday, Saturday, where everybody goes and party. But I was decided to work at a night night shift with Tim Hortons, and a senior vice president of Royal Bank walked in and said, hey, I love the joy in your heart. I just love the way you treat clients. Would you send me your resume? I want to give you an opportunity to work with RBC. And I got hired. Regardless, despite of my criminal record, they hired me, gave me an opportunity. I worked with them for 8 years. My career with them advanced. I had done several opportunities, several jobs with them. From there on, I went to university, got my degree. I went to seminary, got my degree in pastoral ministry. I pastored for 7 years. And the very ministry that handed me the Bible, which is the Gideon's International of Canada, hired me as their regional director.
Wow.
In 2014.
Came full circle.
Yeah, full circle. The very ministry that gave me the Bible now became a place that I worked, and I worked there with 4 years. And then I took time off now and to do more of an international ministry. I work in developing countries like India, Haiti, where I go and do some work there. So my life has changed, and now I'm married. I have 2 kids of my own, and I want to be that father that my father couldn't be for me. And but again, it all happened because I realized that I needed that affirmation, and I found that affirmation through reading a Bible and finding God in that, and that formed a new identity in me, and that identity made me a better person and a different person.
That is so beautiful. Thank you for sharing all of that. There's so much that was said. There's so much gold, and it's clear that you flipped the script, right? You flipped the narrative on your life. A few things I want to point out. So I love that the guy from RBC came in and sensed that joy in you and offered you a career with RBC, because this really highlights the importance of second chances. And that's what we believe at Flip the Script is it doesn't matter what your past is. Everyone deserves a second chance. And so, we live in a society, unfortunately, where on your job application, you have to tick the box if you have a criminal history. And right away, most employers will put your resume at the bottom or in the trash. So there's movements such as like Ban the Box. I know that's in the States, to help people escape from that stigma and be able to have a second chance and get these career opportunities. So I think it's really great that this guy showed up, and there's no mistake that he did. Second of
It's a
all,
she. It was a she.
oh, it's she.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it was, that's like beautiful alignment right there. And when I'm hearing your story, I'm reminded of like everybody has a breaking point, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we break down uh, physically or even mentally, but there's a point of when I think of God or the creator, whatever we want to call it, comes knocking again. And you know, the knocks have been there, but there's a point where it just hits you one day. And for you, it's like the first time, and then you know, you came back out, and then you're like, yeah, whatever. You went back to your lifestyle. So then again, like he comes knocking again, right? But if that happened earlier in your life, you weren't ready for it. Just like me with my story, I wasn't ready. Some people could have told me everything they wanted to tell me and would just go in one ear and out the other. But
Right.
I had to be ready. And sounds like same with you, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. And I also, you talked about earlier in the story about this belonging, sense of belonging. And it is a common theme with people who grew up in single parent families, or people who have gang affiliations, people who are at-risk youth. They have this common theme of, I mean, we all want to belong at the end of the day, right? It's our human nature to belong and be appreciated. So I love that you touched on that, because it's, where do we fit in this world, right? And even as adults, it's like, where do we fit in? We often live our life day to day, but what's our identity in this lifetime? So I can see how you growing up without a father, and then going from Sri Lanka to Germany to Canada at a young age, your formative years, you're like, oh my gosh, like there's just so much happening. But I love that you share that, and this is why story sharing is so important, because someone like the judge who says that you're a menace to society only sees the crime that you committed, but they don't get to hear, well, what were your experiences growing up? And your experiences can be starkly different from somebody that grew up in Canada and first language is English and has a great home and no substance abuse issues, has both parents. It's a very different upbringing, but all we see is the crime, right? So, you know, it speaks volumes to your resilience as well. So I acknowledge you for your resilience and being like, you know, I'm going to turn this around. And like, I could feel that spirit from a young age that you had to, you know, to, even if it was anger, to channel this into something else, you know. And now look at where you are, this beautiful place, and you married, you have 2 kids, and you have your ministry, and now you're serving people. Like how beautiful is that?
That's awesome. Well put together. Thanks so much, Jessica. Appreciate that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you are so blessed.
Yes, I am. Yes, right.
So before we wrap up here,
Yeah.
my question for you is, what does forgiveness mean to you?
Yeah. You know, I've contemplated it, and I struggle with forgiveness with quite a bit. First of all, forgiving myself, because I had no problem forgiving others. In my situation, you know, I always felt I was the one that was doing the atrocity.
Right.
So forgiving myself was very major. Uh, and so for me, forgiveness is simply realizing that there's someone who actually has forgiven me, and that is God. And so for me, that forgiveness aspect of God forgiving me, and removing that shame and guilt that I wanted to carry, like a baggage that we tend to carry, was just too much of a load. And I realized I came to that place where, for me, it's the cross. At that cross, God tells me, you know, bring your shame, bring your guilt, and lay it there. And that's what I did. And the more I understood His love for me, Jessica, and I know that God is love, and He is not anger, He's not judgment, He is love. And the more I appreciated His love, and the more I allowed His love to be a part of my life, I started seeing myself as a different person. And I know I couldn't change my past, and God deals with my past. The only thing that I could change is today, my present. So coming to that term of that today in my present, I could make difference, and allowing that difference to form a new person or new identity was a big part. So I was able to first forgive myself, and that was huge. And then obviously there were times that, of course, I blamed my uncles and my peers, some people who have abused me. Uh, Forgiveness, when it came to forgiving them, I didn't do it for them. I forgave them because it's something that I didn't want to carry anymore. And
Yeah.
I was just releasing that hold that they had, whether they knew or whether what they did, that they acknowledged, it didn't matter to me anymore. I just didn't want that hold on me, and I just didn't want to, use whatever that had on me to keep shaming me, and reducing me again. So forgiveness on that end was more to release me from that hole that they had, that reminded me this is what they
Right.
did to you. So really forgiveness for me begins with acknowledging God and what he has made available for me is the cross. And at the cross, Jesus has paid the price for all our shames and clothes us with a new identity of hope, restoration, with love, beauty. There's one scripture that says, Jessica, for ashes, I will give you beauty. And that's the narrative. God's always like that prodigal returning with his dirty clothes, with all his baggage. But what you see in that story is that father clothing him. He said, bring me a brand new clothes, bring that ring, let's restore this son who was now back again. And that's what God does. So for me, when I saw that, it just opened opened my eyes to a new reality.
Wow, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Is there anything else that you want to say before we go?
No, I just feel that I think there is second chance, and I do want
Yeah.
the people who are going through something like myself or like yourself have gone through to know that there is hope, there is light, past the tunnel, and and I also want to encourage people who are in a better position to take chances with those people, like the VP who took chance with me.
Yeah.
Give people a second chance. Take risk with them, and hear their story, and we will start seeing people who become a mess as a mess, but that mess will become a message for them. Your test is always your testimony, your mess is always your message. And so I believe that, if people take hold of that, I think they too could make that change.
Beautiful. With that, I appreciate you, John. Thank you so much for sharing.
All right, take care, we'll talk soon.
You too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. How do I end this?